Science and Pajamas! Alright, you guys. So today we're just going to have a very brief discussion on the biogeochemical cycles. Hey, come here, dude. Come here. Ripley's just giving me the stink eye. Come here, good boy. Come here. Okay, fine, be that way. So, we're just going to give a very brief discussion on the biogeochemical cycles. Now, what these are is it looks at how certain compounds, certain chemicals. Hi. Yes, I know you're so cute. Yes, you are. So it looks at how certain chemicals and certain compounds move through the different ecosystems so that they can be recycled. Really? You don't want to talk about this? Oh, too bad. Haha, silly boy. So it talks about how specific compounds that are essential for life processes and for life to occur, how these move through the ecosystem and how they affect the ecosystem, kind of like what sources there are, etc. Now, we're not going to get into super detail about all of them, but we are going to at least list them and discuss them super duper briefly. We're just going to very, very, very super briefly discuss them. But yeah. All right. So, sorry. But yeah, let's get going on this. So there are 5 main biogeochemical cycles. They are the water cycle, the carbon cycle, the oxygen cycle, the nitrogen cycle, and the phosphorus cycle. Okay. So these are the 5 main cycles. Now, what we mean by that, for instance, water cycle. And I will have a video at least on this one because it was talked about in quite a few different classes and quite a few different grades. But the water cycle looks at how water moves and flows through an ecosystem, how it can be in the ground, in a body of water, or it can move into the air and then it can precipitate down. So it simply looks at the movement of water throughout an entire ecosystem. Well, carbon does the same thing. The carbon cycle looks at the movement of carbon. I mean, like I said, it's not the water cycle, but it does look at the carbon. I'll at least show you guys brief pictures of all of them. Yeah. So here, so I don't have them printed off. Oh, actually, wait a minute, I do have pictures. All right. So, the water cycle would look like, and there we go. Sorry. Yeah, there we go. So there's the water cycle. You can see the flow of water through the ecosystem. The carbon cycle, again, it's looking at how carbon moves through the ecosystem. Now, the interesting thing about this one is there are lots and lots of ways to put carbon up into the atmosphere. However, there's only one way to take it out. Right here. Photosynthesis. A lot of the carbon is put into the atmosphere as CO2, carbon dioxide. There's only one way to take it out. Plants doing photosynthesis. The oxygen cycle is probably the simplest one. It just kind of deals with how human or animals and plants have this nice symbiotic relationship. We breathe out carbon dioxide, or CO2. The plants take it in, and then they release oxygen gas. So O2. They release O2, we take it in. We release CO2, they take it in, and so on and so on. All right, the nitrogen cycle. This looks at the flow of nitrogen throughout the ecosystem. And there are 2 things I want to talk about in terms of the nitrogen cycle. So nitrogen is typically found in forms like in the soil that cannot be used by different organisms like the plants. They can't take it in. I just want to make sure I say the words correctly. Yeah. Okay. So when there is nitrogen in the soil, it cannot be absorbed into the plants. So what happens is a process called nitrogen fixation. And what that is, let me get back to the picture. That's all the way over on this side. So there is a symbiotic relationship between plants, specifically their roots, such as legumes, and certain bacteria that live in the soil. Now, what happens is the bacteria gets a nice, safe place to live, and in return, they fixate nitrogen, meaning that they take nitrogen and they turn it into ammonia, which is a usable form, and the plants can actually use that. So the plants are getting ammonia from the bacteria, and we can get it then. We get nitrogen from eating certain plants that have high amounts of nitrogen. It also works backwards. After an organism dies and is decomposing, there's a process called denitrification, and that's where bacteria can break down the organic matter, break down the ammonia, turning it back into nitrogen and letting it back into the soil. All right. And then the last process, the last biogeochemical process is the phosphorus cycle. You can see that here. Now, one of the big things about phosphorus, one way that we get it is by, weathering of rocks. So the rocks break down due to, just weathering over time from rain and wind. And then the phosphorus that has come off of them can get into the soil, can get run off into the water, and so on and so on. All right. Now, those are more so the natural ways. Of course, there's also things like runoff from farms, where that can put excess nitrogen or phosphorus into the water supply, and that can lead to algae blooms. And oftentimes these algae blooms, what it is the algae is feeding on the extra nitrogen and phosphorus, which is causing their population to explode, and that can actually have very, very detrimental effects to the ecosystem of that lake, because it's usually in a nice balance, whereas now you have this algae whose population is exploding, and it can actually block out some of the sun in the water, and it can be toxic to certain species of fish. So it just tends to be not all that good. But yeah, that's just what I wanted to kind of discuss and how I wanted to introduce the cycles. I hope it helped. I know we didn't go into too much detail on any of the different steps. Like I said, there'll probably be one on the water cycle. The other ones, not as much. We don't necessarily go into a whole lot of super detail about them in my class, but maybe one day I'll make them. Anyways, you guys, take care, stay awesome, and stay safe. All right, you guys, talk to you later.